It was a chilly Wednesday morning when Officer Jack Miller arrived at Willow Creek Elementary with his canine partner, Thor. The school grounds buzzed with the usual chaos: parents rushing to drop off kids, teachers hurrying into classrooms, and children laughing on the playground. Nothing about that morning seemed unusual at first, but that was before Thor started acting strange. As part of his daily routine, Officer Miller walked the school halls to ensure everything was secure. Thor, a seasoned German shepherd, trained in detection, usually trotted calmly beside him. But, as they passed the old east hallway, something changed. Thor stopped abruptly. His ears perked up. His nose twitched. Then, without warning, he lunged toward the locked maintenance room door and began barking furiously. Miller tried to pull him back, but Thor's body was tense. He scratched at the floor, growled low, and barked with urgency. It wasn't playful behavior, it was serious. Something had triggered the dog's instincts in a way Miller had rarely seen. The hallway had been closed for years. According to the school staff, that wing had been sealed off due to a mold problem in the old storage areas. No one used it anymore. But now, the school's most trusted canine was signaling that something wasn't right behind that door, perhaps even beneath it. Principal Hanley arrived moments later, alerted by a teacher who had heard the commotion. She was surprised to see the canine unit focused on the long-abandoned part of the school. "There's nothing in there," she said, unlocking the door. "Just old desks and furniture we never got around to clearing out." But Thor didn't head for the room itself. Instead, he continued to scratch and sniff the floorboards just outside the door, his behavior growing more intense. That was when Officer Miller made the call. He requested backup and asked for a facility map. Something about the dog's reaction wasn't adding up, and he wasn't about to ignore a trained canine's instincts. Students began to notice the unusual activity in the hallway. Some peered through classroom windows, whispering excitedly about the barking dog. Teachers tried to keep them focused, but curiosity was spreading. Even the assistant principal seemed unsettled as more officers arrived and taped off the area. One of the older janitors, Mr. Alvarez, stepped forward with a hesitant look on his face. "I remember something odd about this hallway," he said. "Back when I started here in the 90s, there was talk about a sub-basement. Some kind of old storage room that was sealed up after the school renovations. But it never showed up on any of our blueprints." Officer Miller raised an eyebrow. A sealed sub-basement. It sounded like the beginning of a ghost story, but Thor wasn't barking at shadows. Whatever was under that hallway was real. Using a portable scanner, officers swept the floor area, where Thor was most focused. The device pinged there was a hollow space beneath the boards. Now it was official. Something was down there, and no one had known about it for years. By late morning, the district superintendent gave permission for limited floor removal under police supervision. Contractors began pulling up tiles and boards piece by piece. The entire area was blocked off as school staff tried to maintain calm. Then a moment came. One of the workers shouted, and everyone leaned in. Underneath layers of wood and insulation, they had uncovered something unexpected: a metal latch built into the floor. A hidden hatch, sealed tight and nearly invisible. Thor barked again, louder this time. The officers looked at one another. Whatever lay beneath Willow Creek Elementary, it had been buried for decades, and now it was about to be revealed. As the officers gathered around the newly uncovered hatch, a deep silence filled the hallway. The metal latch looked worn with age, its surface rusted and almost fused to the wooden frame around it. The way it had been hidden under several layers of floorboards suggested it wasn't meant to be found. Even Principal Hanley, usually composed and confident, looked uneasy as she stepped back. Officer Miller radioed in for a full building schematic. Within 30 minutes, a city records official arrived with the archived blueprints of Willow Creek Elementary. Everyone huddled around the layout, but it didn't take long for them to realize something strange. This section of the school wasn't listed in any official documents. The east wing, where Thor had raised the alarm, showed no indication of a hatch room or any underground structure. The floor plan ended at the maintenance hallway. No sub-basement, no hidden room. It was as if the space simply didn't exist. This blueprint was updated after the 1985 renovation, the records officer said. If there was anything under there before, it should have been marked. Unless ... double quotes, he didn't finish the sentence. But everyone understood. Something had been deliberately left out, or possibly removed from the records. Mr. Alvarez, the janitor who had hinted about the sub-basement, stepped forward again. "Back when I was new here, the old maintenance guy to me used to joke, about a ghost classroom under the school. He said it was sealed up after some kind of incident, but nobody believed him. We just thought he liked telling stories. That statement made everyone pause. The word incident hung heavy in the air. Meanwhile, Thor remained tense, his eyes fixed on the hatch. He paced, growled occasionally, and returned to the same spot again and again. Officer Miller had worked with the dog for over 5 years and had never seen him this focused. He was certain now whatever lay below was still giving off a scent, strong enough to trigger Thor's training. After confirming the structural safety of the area, the contractors began to work on opening the hatch. It took almost an hour to loosen the rusted bolts and lift the creaking metal door. A cloud of dust and a musty odor filled the air. The space below was pitch black. Officer Miller pointed his flashlight down into the darkness. A narrow stairway, made of old concrete, led downward into what looked like a hidden chamber. The steps were crumbling slightly at the edges, and cobwebs clung to the walls like drapes. "Is that a classroom?" one of the officers whispered. What they saw at the bottom of the stairs was chilling. Wooden desks, some overturned and cracked, were scattered across a small room. Faded student drawings clung to the walls. There was even a chalkboard on the far end, still bearing faint white marks that looked like writing. Time had frozen the space, leaving it eerily untouched. It was a classroom, but not one anyone remembered being part of Willow Creek. Flashlights revealed more strange details. A rusted fire alarm, a shelf of decaying books, a cracked wall clock stuck at 2:12. The air felt thick, like the room itself hadn't been disturbed in decades. Miller took a few steps inside, Thor right beside him. The dog sniffed the air, then suddenly darted to the corner of the room and began barking again. His nose was pressed against a wooden panel built into the wall. Something was behind it. Officers quickly removed the panel, revealing a small, hidden door barely the size of a crawl space. On the floor next to it was a broken pencil and a folded piece of yellowed paper. Unfolding it slowly, Miller read the single line written in shaky handwriting. "They told us never to open this door." A deep unease settled over the group. No one spoke. All eyes were now on the crawlspace door, and whatever waited beyond it. The air inside the hidden classroom was still and unnaturally cold. Officer Miller stared at the small door revealed behind the panel, the faded note still in his hand. Thor had stopped barking but stood motionless, his gaze locked on the entrance, as if waiting for a signal. The officers exchanged uneasy glances. No one wanted to admit it, but they all felt the same thing. Something wasn't right about this place. With flashlights aimed forward, Miller slowly crouched down and opened the crawlspace door. It creaked open, revealing a dark tunnel no more than 3 feet high. The walls were lined with wooden support beams, and the floor was packed dirt. A faint metallic smell wafted from within, something between rust and dampness. It was a smell Miller couldn't quite place, but it made his skin crawl. "I'll go first," he said, adjusting his flashlight and crawling in. Thor followed closely. Behind, the tunnel stretched for nearly 20 feet before opening into another small chamber. Unlike the classroom above, this room looked more like a bunker. The concrete walls were bare, the ceiling low. There were old cans stacked in one corner, an overturned cot, and a single electric lamp that hadn't worked in years. But what caught Miller's attention was something more recent. On the floor, partially buried in the dirt, was a set of footprints. Fresh ones. Whoever had been here had come through recently, and they weren't part of the school staff or maintenance team. Thor growled again and moved toward a second tunnel on the opposite wall. It was slightly wider, as if reinforced or used more often. Miller called for backup, and within minutes, 2 more officers joined him. They confirmed the footprints and found a small pile of supplies: bottled water, a flashlight, and a torn jacket. Nothing too unusual on its own, except for one disturbing detail. The flashlight was still warm. Whoever was down here wasn't just hiding. They had been here that very day. Back in the classroom, above, Principal Hanley stood in shock as she watched. "Officers, bring up the items." "None of this makes sense," she muttered. "No one has access to that area. The doors are always locked. The hallway's been unused for years." Mr. Alvarez looked pale. "I remember now. Tommy, the old janitor, he used to say he heard noises down there. He thought it was rats, but sometimes he said he heard voices, too, whispering, like kids talking." We all laughed at him. Maybe he wasn't imagining it. Down in the tunnels, the search team pressed forward. The second passage sloped downward, leading into another chamber, this one darker and colder. It was completely silent, except for the echo of their footsteps. Then, Thor stopped. His ears perked up, and he barked once, sharp and alert. The flashlight beams swept across the room and landed on a metal door bolted shut from the inside. A small vent near the top revealed movement to flicker, a shadow. "There's someone in there," one of the officers whispered. They knocked, called out, but got no reply. They tried the door, but it wouldn't budge. Suddenly, something thudded from inside. Not loud, but deliberate. Then another thump, closer, followed by a dragging sound. Thor backed away slightly, growling low. Miller signaled the team to stay alert. This wasn't just about discovering an old room anymore. They had stumbled into something hidden for decades, something someone didn't want found. As they prepared to open the door, a single thought echoed through Miller's mind. What if they were waking up something that was meant to stay buried? The metal door stood before them like a relic from a forgotten war, rusted, heavy, and unsettlingly silent. Officer Miller placed a gloved hand on the surface. It was cold, almost too cold for being underground. Thor stayed behind him, pacing in place and releasing soft, low growls that echoed through the tunnels. The thuds they had heard from inside had stopped, but the tension in the air had not. Miller motioned for one of the officers to use the pry bar. With a groan of metal and stone, they forced the door open inch by inch. Dust poured out, and a gust of stale air blew into their faces. Flashlights quickly pierced the darkness within, and the scene that unfolded was unlike anything they had prepared for. It was another room, smaller than the classroom above, but this one had clearly been used recently. Along one wall were shelves, filled with half-rotted food supplies, tools, and old-school documents wrapped in plastic. On the floor were sleeping bags, newspapers, and a small makeshift stove built from bricks and a rusted metal plate. But it wasn't the setup that froze them in place. It was what was on the walls. Drawings, hundreds of them, childlike in style, done with crayons and markers, taped up with care. Each drawing showed the school above. Hallways, classrooms, entrances, and exits. Some were recent, showing the current layout, including the updated security camera placements, and even teachers' routines. The level of detail was disturbing. At the center of the wall was a large map, made from stitched-together notebook pages. It covered the entire school, and its grounds, and circled in red ink were specific rooms, including 3 kindergarten classrooms, the cafeteria, and the gym. "What is this?" one of the officers asked quietly, stepping closer to inspect the drawings. Miller didn't answer. His eyes were on the far corner of the room, where an old school desk sat alone, covered in dust, but surrounded by more recent footprints. On the desk was a stack of lined paper with more sketches, some unfinished, some showing stick figure people with blank faces. Suddenly, a crack echoed in the tunnels behind them like wood splintering. Everyone turned sharply, flashlights swinging. "Nothing. Check the entrance," Miller ordered, heart pounding. One officer went back down the tunnel, calling out, but got no reply. The silence that followed was even worse than the noise. Then something unexpected happened. Thor darted forward, not toward the tunnel, but toward a loose panel near the back of the room. He barked sharply and began digging. Within seconds, the officers helped pull the panel away, revealing another tunnel, this one different. It was freshly dug, narrow and ragged. With dirt still loose on the floor, someone had been using this tunnel recently, and possibly even while the officers were just steps away. The thought was chilling. Miller looked at the stack of drawings. Again he noticed a new one lying on top. It was drawn in colored pencil, and seemed rushed. The stick figures were gathered in a room labeled library. A crude red circle was drawn around it, and above the drawing were the words, "Soon." His blood ran cold. "Get the principal on the radio," he barked. "Lock down the building now." Back at the school, the children were preparing for reading time in the library. No one had any idea that someone had been watching, planning, and hiding beneath their feet, maybe for years. And now, it looked like whoever it was might be planning to come back. The announcement echoed through the school's PA system with a sharp buzz. "This is a precautionary lockdown. All staff and students, please remain in your classrooms and follow lockdown protocols." In the library, a class of sat frozen as their teacher, Ms. Bell, quickly locked the doors and pulled the blinds. She smiled nervously at the children, trying to keep calm, but her hands trembled as she moved. Back in the tunnels, Officer Miller's voice came through the radio. "Secure the library. Repeat, secure the library, immediately. We have reason to believe it may be a target." Principal Hanley and 2 security officers rushed toward the east stairwell leading to the library. The halls were eerily quiet, with classroom lights dimmed and students hidden behind bookshelves, under desks, or in storage closets. Meanwhile, deep below the school, Miller, Thor, and the rest of the team stood before the fresh tunnel Thor had uncovered. It twisted sharply, after only a few feet, and dipped downward into darkness again. "He's been using this to move between the sublevel and the school," Miller said, jaw tight. "And he's watching. He knew we were coming." Thor's growling grew more intense as they followed the tunnel. Weapons drawn, flashlights cutting through the shadows. Every creak, every falling piece of dirt, sent a jolt through the team. Suddenly, Thor stopped. He pressed his body low and stared ahead into the darkness. Miller knelt beside him, peering forward. There was movement, just a flicker, but unmistakable. A shape human small disappeared around the curve of the tunnel. "Stop, police," one officer shouted. They surged forward, but when they reached the corner, the figure was gone. All that remained was a discarded sock, child-sized, back in the school above. Hanley and security reached the library just as one of the assistant teachers unlocked the door. "We're fine. Just confused what's going on," she whispered. "We don't have time to explain," Hanley replied. "We're securing the perimeter. Keep the kids away from the windows and doors. Stay down and stay silent." As the security officers spread out along the hallway, a faint sound caught one of their ears, a soft knock. 3 taps, then silence. It came from the janitor's closet, next to the library. The officer moved closer, cautiously placing his hand on the knob. He opened the door slowly and aimed his flashlight inside. Nothing, just mops, buckets, and shelves. But then, he noticed a faint draft near the floor. The wall behind the shelves looked off newer than the rest of the school. He radioed it in. "We may have a hidden passage behind the janitor's closet. It looks freshly sealed." Miller's voice came back immediately. "He's using access points inside the school. Don't wait, open it." They moved quickly, pulling back the shelves. Behind them was a wooden panel with a crude latch. As they pried it open, a wave of musty air spilled out. A short crawlspace led into darkness. At that moment, another call came through Miller's radio. "Sir, ... we just found something else in the lower tunnel. A mattress, food wrappers, children's shoes. At least 3 different sizes." Miller felt his stomach drop. "There's more than one." Now it was clear this wasn't just someone hiding. Someone had been keeping children beneath the school. And there was no telling how long it had been going on, nor how many had come and gone without anyone knowing. Back above, Thor suddenly barked and lunged into the new passage behind the janitor's closet. The officers followed, hearts racing, weapons ready. They didn't know who or what they were about to find, but they were no longer chasing shadows. They were chasing something that had already slipped into their walls. Thor darted into the crawlspace behind the janitor's closet like a bullet, his growls echoing in the narrow passage. The officers scrambled after him, ducking low as the walls closed in around them. Flashlights flickered off the wooden beams and dirt-lined ceiling, casting dancing shadows on every side. The tunnel was tight and crude, clearly dug by hand. Sections had been reinforced with old boards, likely taken from discarded school supplies. The deeper they went, the more it became clear someone had spent years constructing this network. "Thor's pace is picking up," Miller said, breath tight, as he followed the dog through a sharp turn. "He's on a scent." Behind him, Officer Daniels pointed his flashlight toward a strange bundle wedged in a nook of the tunnel wall. "Sir, you need to see this." Miller turned. The bundle was wrapped in an old child's blanket. Inside were 3 tiny notebooks, each with a name written on the front: Lana, Benny, and Ava. Each page was filled with childlike handwriting, descriptions of dark tunnels, being told to stay quiet, games played in the dark, and songs they were forced to sing. Each notebook ended abruptly, no final entries, just blank pages after a certain point. "Are these journals?" Daniels asked. Voice low. Miller nodded. "These kids, they were being kept down here. They were writing this like a diary." Thor let out a sharp bark ahead. The team snapped back into motion. They followed the sound into a chamber that opened slightly wider, barely enough to crouch. There, at the end of the room, sat a large filing cabinet, trusted and covered in dirt. Thor stood beside it, barking and pulling at the base. Miller and another officer moved the cabinet aside, revealing yet another tunnel, this one lined with faded wallpaper. It didn't match anything else in the school. "Wait," Officer Daniels whispered. "This wallpaper. This was used in the old nursery wing before it was torn down in the 90s. Then this tunnel predates even the last renovation," Miller said grimly. That's over 30 years. They crawled into the wallpaper-lined shaft, which sloped downward into what felt like a wider basement. The air became colder, more stale. The walls were damp. As they moved farther, they reached another door, wooden this time, with a strange set of symbols carved into it. Miller paused. The symbols weren't letters, not any he recognized. But one thing was unmistakable. There were 7 marks, each different, each carved with care. He reached out and pushed the door. It creaked open slowly. Inside, the room was larger than any they had seen, and it was filled with beds, small beds, dozens of them, made with mismatched blankets. Some were neatly arranged. Others were broken, with old toys scattered around, dolls without eyes, crayons snapped in half, half-used coloring books, and, on the far wall, a message written in thick red paint or something close to it. We are still here. The officers scanned the room in silence. Miller felt a chill down his spine. This isn't just a hideout. This is a shelter. Or maybe, a prison. Before they could process more, the radio on Miller's chest crackled. "Sir," came the voice from the officer guarding the school entrance. "You need to come up. Someone's here." A man just walked into the school, claiming he's the original janitor. He says he built all of this. Miller's eyes widened. "What's his name?" the radio hissed. Then came the reply. "He says his name is Tommy." Miller stood frozen. Tommy, the old janitor. The one who supposedly disappeared decades ago. The one everyone thought was dead. And now, he had returned. Officer Miller climbed the basement steps 2 at a time. Thor at his side, still tense and alert. The radio crackled again. He's sitting in the main office, calm as ever. Says he's been watching the news, and came because he knew this day would come. Miller burst into the front office, where the other officers had gathered. And there he was, an older man, in his late 60s perhaps, wearing a faded school maintenance jacket, hands folded calmly in his lap. His gray beard was unkempt, his eyes glassy but oddly focused. "Tommy Harris?" Miller asked carefully. The old man looked up and smiled faintly. "I wondered if it'd be you, or someone like you. Where have you been?" "The school said you disappeared over 20 years ago." "I never disappeared," Tommy said softly. "I just stopped being seen." The room fell silent. Miller kept his voice steady. "You want to explain that? And maybe tell me why there's a maze of tunnels beneath this school, why there are children's belongings down there." Tommy's expression didn't change. "They were abandoned, officer. Forgotten. Some of them ran. Others were left. I gave them a place to stay." "You're saying you were keeping them down there?" Miller's voice hardened. "No, not me," Tommy said, shaking his head. "I just built the space. But I wasn't the only one who knew. It existed. It was supposed to be safe. A place to hide from things above." "What things?" Tommy leaned forward slightly. "The school used to have a different purpose, long ago. Back in the 70s and 80s, kids who didn't have families, who couldn't be placed, some of them, were brought here unofficially. People thought, if no one asked questions, there'd be no answers needed." Miller's stomach tightened. "You're talking about secret programs?" Tommy nodded slowly. "Unofficial. Off the record. But real. And when those programs ended, the kids were forgotten. Some wandered off. Some stayed underground. Some never left. And the recent signs? The journals, the food, the drawings." Tommy's eyes darkened. "Not all the children are gone. Some grew up down there. They stayed hidden. They don't trust the surface. They still think the world forgot them." Miller felt the weight of the words hit hard. "How many? I don't know anymore," Tommy replied. "But I heard them. I used to leave food. Sometimes I'd find it gone. Sometimes I'd hear laughter. Or weeping. They moved through the tunnels like shadows. And the map. The one showing the library. The classrooms." Tommy looked down. "They're curious about the world above. Some of them want to come up. Others don't." Suddenly, a second officer burst into the room. "So we've got movement in the West Wing hallway." Security cameras picked up someone crawling from a vent. Small frame, looks like a child. Miller turned to Tommy. "Is it one of them?" Tommy didn't answer. Instead, he stood slowly. "You'll need to be careful. They scare easy. And they've lived too long in darkness to trust the light." Miller ordered a small team to head toward the West Wing. He and Thor followed, his mind racing. If even a part of what Tommy said was true, then this wasn't a rescue. It was a recovery. And possibly a confrontation. As they turned a corner near the West Wing, they saw it just a glimpse. A young figure, no more than 10 years old, barefoot, and fast, darting into a storage room. They reached the room moments later. Inside, they found the child, thin, wide-eyed, crouched behind old desks. He didn't speak, only stared at them with eyes that had seen too much. Thor didn't growl. He simply sat quietly, as if sensing this child wasn't a threat. Miller lowered his flashlight and crouched. "Hey there, you're safe now." The boy didn't answer, but he reached into his shirt and pulled out a torn page. It was another map, and it showed more tunnels. Tunnels they hadn't even found yet. Officer Miller studied the torn map in the child's trembling hands. It was hand-drawn like the others, but different, more detailed, more recent. Several new tunnels branched far beyond the school's original foundation. One led toward the nearby woods. Another extended toward the abandoned maintenance shed behind the playground. Miller handed the map to one of the officers. "Get a team to that shed. Now." The boy remained silent, curled in the corner. His eyes darted nervously toward the vents in the ceiling, as if expecting someone or something to come through at any moment. Miller crouched again, lowering his voice. "What's your name, son?" The boy hesitated. Then, barely a whisper, "Micah." "How long have you been down there, Micah?" He glanced at the floor. "Always. Since I was little. There's more of us, but not all want to leave." Back in the main office, Tommy Harris sat quietly, watching the storm unfold through the glass window. Principal Hanley stood nearby, her expression a mix of disbelief and horror. "You knew this was happening all these years." "I knew," Tommy said. "But when I tried to speak up back then, no one listened. They thought I was crazy. So I stayed quiet. I left food. I kept the doors closed. I thought I was doing what was right." Hanley's voice was low and cold. "You could have saved them." Tommy looked at her, hollow-eyed. "Maybe I still can." Meanwhile, Miller and the team reached the maintenance shed, just as backup arrived. It was old, barely standing, covered in vines and rust. But the map had been accurate. Beneath a loose board behind the workbench, they found a trapdor dot. As they opened it, a powerful musty scent poured out. Flashlights revealed stairs descending into another section of the tunnel system, one they hadn't seen before. And down there, they found them. 4 more children, ranging in age from 5 to 14, dirty, scared, but alive. They huddled together in a room lit by a battery-powered lantern, filled with tattered blankets and old toys. One girl had a walkie-talkie in her hand. When she saw the officers, she screamed and hid behind the others. "Micah sent us," Miller said gently. "You're safe now. We're here to help." The children looked uncertain, but when Thor walked forward and sat calmly in front of them, tails wagging gently, something in their faces softened. The oldest stepped forward cautiously, then whispered, "He told us people would come one day. He said the lights would return." Back at the school, as medical teams arrived and set up triage, more pieces of the puzzle came together. It turned out that years ago, an undocumented system of foster placements had collapsed, leaving a handful of children unaccounted for. With no formal records, they simply vanished, forgotten by a system that never admitted they were lost. Tommy had tried to shelter them, but over the years, others took over the underground space. Older children, who grew bitter, suspicious, even dangerous. What began as a refuge had turned into something else entirely. By nightfall, 7 children had been recovered. News vans gathered outside the school gates, but officials kept the story quiet for the time being. It was too disturbing, too complex, and too tangled in institutional neglect. Investigations were launched. The tunnels were sealed, then mapped. Psychological teams were brought in, and through it all, Micah never left Thor's side. In the days that followed, Officer Miller visited the hospital frequently. The kids were slowly recovering, talking more, eating again, even smiling. Micah finally opened up and confirmed what they feared. There were still a few who hadn't been found. Some had left. Others had refused to come up. And at least one someone, they called the Watcher, had kept them from ever reaching the surface. That last part kept Miller awake at night, because even though the children were safe now, he couldn't shake the feeling that beneath the school, someone was still watching and waiting.